Process-based management asks an organisation, its people and their teams to do many things that are quite different and perhaps challenging. Additional support services are needed if processes are to be effectively managed and improved. There's a lot to be done, and the continuous bit of continuous improvement means it's not going to end anytime soon. Whether it's called the BPM Centre of Excellence or the Centre of Expertise or the BPM Group or the Office of BPM, the Central Process Support Group plays a vital role in creating sustainable process-based management. But it may not be the role that you're expecting. In this video, I want to provide some insights into how we can best design and operate the Office of BPM. Here's the question. Here's the most important question, I think, that we should be asking all of the time in all of our process work, perhaps in all of our work, perhaps in all of our lives. What's the problem we're trying to fix? When it comes to the Office of BPM, I think when we're establishing it, we really must be clear about what its mission and vision is, what services it's going to provide, what services it won't provide, and where it fits into the organisation. So a fundamental question to start with for each organisation, and perhaps the answers are slightly different, but what's the problem we're trying to fix? What is the point of having an Office of BPM? That's going to be important to establish. A couple of slides to locate the Office of BPM in the broader theory, and for each of these next 3 slides there's a separate video. You might like to check that out. So here's our model of process governance, the tripartite model. We have 3 elements: authority, support and ownership. And of course support is going to come from the Office of BPM. And in simple terms, I think of the Office of BPM as a life support system for process owners, for the process council, for functional managers, for everyone in the organisation involved in creating and sustaining effective process-based management. So the Office of BPM is critical. It's not there to do everything, but it's there to facilitate it. It's there to enable it. It's there to support and to make it happen. In the circles, we might ask, where does the Office of BPM get involved? And the short answer is everywhere. Process ownership circle, the PO circle, of course, defines effectively the process owner role, but an Office of BPM might help with the process owner in establishing the process KPIs, setting targets, doing the assessment, deciding how to respond, and then once we trigger the PI circle, it could be, in the early days in particular, that the Office of BPM is involved in the detail of running a process improvement project. So they might be in there in the detail on a pretty constant basis. Or, as time goes on and we raise capability across the organisation, perhaps they're taking a step back and they're involved to come and do some quality assurance, or perhaps they've come to answer some questions, to help as asked. So that maybe their involvement will step back. But it still remains across the whole process-based management environment. The Office of BPM is there to ensure quality outcomes and to help everyone involved. The 7 enablers, as you might have seen in the video, enable the circles to turn. And again, the Office of BPM plays an important role in facilitating all of this. These are 7 elements that we need to be developing more or less in sync to give ourselves the best chance of creating and sustaining effective process-based management. And the Office of BPM has a key role to play in making that happen, in providing oversight and guidance, and testing and measuring, adjusting, being the guiding hand in creating effective process-based management. Now, here's a thought. If we're going to say we are the process centre of excellence, that's setting a high bar, but let's say we're the process centre of excellence, the Office of BPM, we really should be one of the poster children for good process management, shouldn't we? So it would be embarrassing for someone to say to people in the Office of BPM, show me the processes in which you're involved, and we didn't have a good answer. So maybe we should have some little process architecture for the work that goes on in the office. Now, this example here comes out of my process architecture reference model. There's a process, it's a shared management process. You see it at the top here. It's called Improved Process Performance. These are just generic names. Change them to whatever you like if you prefer. But Improved Process Performance is what I call it. And it has these 5 sub-processes. Maintain process-based management up here at the top is just maintaining a description of how we describe our process-based management environment and how we maintain that. And then we've got these 2 major elements here. One, enabling process management, and that, if you like, is something like the process ownership, the PO circle. And you'll see as you look down the sub-processes of that a reflection of the 7 enablers, plus some other things about modelling excellence, about supporting executive management and facilitating dispute resolution. So these are the kind of process management areas. And then if we come over to the right-hand side, we've got enable process improvement. And this, if you like, is the PI circle. So it's about maintaining the process improvement methodology, whatever that is, maintaining an overall improvement plan, what are we going to do this year, supporting projects, which might be detailed hands-on, or it might be answering questions when asked. We still have a role for assuring process quality, and tracking benefit realisation, of course, is a fundamentally important thing to do across the organisation. And then the other two processes there are document processes, so that's modelling and whatever other documentation. And that's not to say that the office is going to do all of that, but it will define how it's done and have some quality assurance role. And deliver process improvement project is a process, deliver PIP is a process down at the bottom there, which would reflect whatever methodology you're using. That one there is actually the sprint PIP methodology, but the office would maintain that method, would track its performance, do all of those sorts of things. That's not to say it's going to always be the one executing the process, of course, but it would maintain it. So we need to be maintaining a view of the Office of BPM work as a set of processes, because if we're going to evangelise process and we're going to encourage everyone else to do it, then of course we need to be doing it. So as we're doing that, as we're evangelising process, I think we need to keep in mind the prime objective of the Office of BPM. And sometimes we can lose sight of that. But the prime objective, I think, is to raise process-based management capability everywhere else in the organisation. Sure, the office needs to be the experts, the super users, the internal consultants and the quality assurance managers. But their prime role, I think, is to raise capability in the rest of the organisation. If we say the alternative is to say that the office is going to do everything and then we've just created a bottleneck. Find the video on the Office for the Prevention of Process Improvement, the OBPM. We don't want that, obviously. So there needs to be a very conscious determination to be raising capability across the organisation. We need a plan for that because it won't happen organically. And over time, I think we should expect to see the involvement of the office change as the involvement of business units also changes. So over time, if we're raising capability across the organisation, then the detailed involvement of the Office of BPM should reduce in percentage terms, and the detailed involvement of the business units should increase. And neither would ever be zero, because the office would still maintain its role as internal consultants and quality managers, etc., and the business units will always have some requirement for advice and guidance. But over time, as BPM maturity increases, we should expect the role of the office to change. A couple of quick points about design features of the Office of BPM. I think it should always be smallish. I think a literal handful of people can do an enormous amount of good work even in the largest organisation. If it gets too large, it becomes a budget target for the next budget cuts, so we just need to be careful about cost benefits, etc. It certainly needs to be coordinated. Whether it needs to be physically centralised or not rather depends on the organisation and its culture. I've seen distributed teams work well. That happens in some organisations, in other organisations not so well. But it certainly needs to be coordinated, a single team, and it needs to be focused on the process work and full-time. I think if these are people who are going to do process work when they get a spare moment, then that's unlikely to happen, because how many of us get spare moments? And it needs to be properly funded, so budget funded, not project funded. It needs to have some certainty about its future so it can get on and execute its mission and vision. And then we also need to think about how it fits in with the rest of the organisation, because we might have a range of other offices of various sorts, or internal service groups, an office of strategy management, project management office, some organisational excellence department, perhaps an office of quality management, perhaps there's some business excellence teamwork going on, maybe there's even an office for innovation. So how do all these things fit together? They're all perfectly valid and they're different. There's some overlaps perhaps, but we just need to be very clear about how all that fits together. A good way of doing that, of course, would be to have a look at the processes of each of those offices and make sure we don't have any underlaps and overlaps, and we can see how they all fit together and how they make a joint contribution to organisational performance. Because we want them to fit together and work nicely, don't we? We don't want them be it loggerheads, because that's just obviously a waste of time. By the way, there is a book that I put together with Bassam and Andre and Leandro some time ago now, and you probably find it difficult to find a printed copy, but on my website you'll find a nicely formatted PDF, at least of the English version. There is an Arabic and a Portuguese version. If you wanted copies of those, then contact me and I'll find you a link to get them. But certainly the English version is available as a free download on my website if you're interested. So let's summarise all of this. How do we pull together these thoughts about the Office of BPM, or the Centre of Excellence, or whatever you want to call it? I think its prime objective is to raise capability across the organisation. I think it's important we keep that in mind. It does all sorts of other things, of course, but it needs to be focused on that, and it needs an active plan, because it won't happen automatically. And if it's successful and it has to do everything, then ultimately it's going to fail because of its success, and that will be disappointing. It needs to be focused and full-time and funded. It's a real thing. It needs to have full-time people who are focused entirely on process, and it doesn't have to be worried about next quarter's funding. We need to think about how it works in the whole organisational ecosystem, because there's lots of things going on in our organisations, and so how does it fit in? What does it do? What doesn't it do? And then, really it needs to be a good example of how to do effective process-based management and improvement. If someone asks in our organisation, what's the best example you've got of good process management? It would be nice, wouldn't it, to be able to say, well, the Office of BPM is our gold standard for effective process-based management. And if we can't say that, wouldn't it be just a little bit embarrassing? Thanks for joining me for this Process Insight. Do you have an Office of BPM or similar? We'd all love to hear about your experiences and lessons learned if you're able to share below. If you're finding these videos useful, you might like to subscribe, give me a thumbs up to help others find them. Do you have a comment or a question? I'll respond to every one of them. And thanks for sharing this time with me. If you'd like to continue the conversation, I'd love to hear from you.